All right, go ahead and
3, 2, 1. Over to you, Lisa.
let's start anew, shall we? I will start again just for the recording. Yes, absolutely thrilled to see you all here today. My name is Lisa Hayamoto. I'm the Director of Teaching and Learning at Lion Publishers. And I just wanted to give you a little background about the bootcamp and Lion. And then Philip will talk a little bit about the bootcamp itself. So this is the second year that we're running the GNI Startups Bootcamp. It's a partnership with the Google News Initiative. We were absolutely thrilled last year. Our inaugural cohort of 24 just were really a group of amazing folks doing great things for their community and just launched these really wonderful publications that are already doing great things. And we are really excited to be able to do that again this year. At Lion, that's sort of our mission, is to support independent news businesses, both those that are starting up and those that have been going for a while. Our goal is to help more folks start news businesses, and then also to help those who are already in existence become more sustainable. We really are operating from this place of more local, independent, wonderful journalism out in the world is good for everyone. So really thrilled you're here today. I'd like to introduce Philip Smith, the Bootcamp Director. He's the reason for the season. He's just one of the best in the biz, and we're so excited that he is leading the charge here. Philip, can you tell us more about the camp?
Sure. Yeah. This is the third time I think we've done the info session. So I'm trying to come up with new and novel ways to describe it for those that might have already listened into a session. But I think the shortest summary is that the bootcamp is the culmination of several years of work. And we believe it is one of the best curriculums available for people that are really keen to actually launch their initiative in 8 weeks. So basically, if you're interested in compressing what takes many journalists when they leave and try and start something new a year or more to do, we basically try and, through many different ways, get you to do in a lot less time, which in the end saves you money, saves you a lot of risk if you spread that time out, and so on. So yeah, the bootcamp was basically developed while I was at Stanford a couple of years ago. I had been working in a startup newsroom for a decade, and I left that newsroom to go into a fellowship at Stanford. And I was asking myself at the time, how can I help other people create startup newsrooms like the one I just left? How could there be dozens or hundreds of these startup newsrooms around the country, basically filling in some of the gaps in coverage that are being left by the general downsizing of news? And so I went to Stanford. I interviewed 100 people who had either started efforts that are still active, or had started and failed, or started and pivoted to something else. So I took all that. I took every class I could on how startups run effectively, how they successfully mitigate risk in the early days. I studied under Steve Blank, who's one of the founding people of the lean startup movement. I got trained as a coach in lean startup methods. And I, the whole time, was thinking, how can I translate everything that I've learned so that it's really easy to digest for journalists who are actually in the throes of starting something new? And I believe that the bootcamp is that, and we've had now 2 opportunities to improve it. We had 24 participants last year who went through the program, and thanks to feedback that we have gotten from them and from outside, and thanks to the ongoing coaching we're doing with them, every time the bootcamp gets better. So you're definitely, this version of the bootcamp is probably going to be at least twice as good as the last one, and no doubt 2 times more successful in terms of those who join succeeding when they come out. So yeah, I mean, that's basically it in a nutshell. It's a pretty intense curriculum. It is very minimalist by design. We don't try and, it's not academic. We don't try and dump a lot of reading on you. It's really about being in practice. So we have you doing exercises or homework every week that is not role playing. It's not fake. You're out there doing it. You're interviewing potential customers. You're talking to potential advertisers and sponsors. You're pitching each other on your idea to try and refine it. You're getting in the kind of good habits related to entrepreneurship, and you're understanding what it means to succeed as an entrepreneur, which is all about mitigating risk. So it's about using your own powers of skepticism as people who've either been involved in journalism or kind of understand a bit about journalism, using your own powers of skepticism on your own idea so that it's battle tested before you introduce it to the world, and thus mitigating a lot of the risk that tends to be the Achilles heel of the startups that falter and fail. So yeah, I mean, I can dive into the specifics of like how the course runs every week and so on, but maybe I'll just pause there and see if people have immediate questions, or Lisa, if I missed something that I should touch on further.
No, I'll just add that, this is the sort of thing that you can like go back to graduate school for, or, you can pay for a really intensive course. And because of our partnership with GNI, we are able to offer this completely for free. And, Philip said it, you're in it, you're doing it, and it moves fast. And you are really pushing your idea forward in a really smart way, quickly. And that's just such a huge benefit of it.
Yeah, and maybe I'll also just mention in the last cohort, there were 24 projects, so about 30 people, and they were real people. A lot of the participants had kids. I have a kid, so I have to deal with that during the pandemic, like everybody else. A lot of people with day jobs, people still working in their newsroom job who kind of needed to keep their involvement quiet until they got out of the program. People with decades of journalism experience, but also people with little to no journalism experience. People from every corner of the country, from Atlanta and Houston to New York and DC. And so this is a program that is flexible enough to accommodate anybody's situation, as long as you have the kind of passion, persistence, and grit to do the kind of absolute minimum asked of you, which we believe is roughly 8 hours a week. So in my other life, I'm an aspiring musician, and I try and carve out, a half hour in the morning every day, half hour at night every day, and a few hours on the weekend to try and make that move forward. And that's kind of what we ask of you. So I know it can be done with other commitments, and the things that we do ask you to do scale up to your available time. So if you're ready to make this your full-time focus and really move your, accelerate your idea extremely quickly in those 8 weeks, it's the difference between doing maybe 1 or 2 interviews in a week if you only have 8 hours, to doing 10 or 12 interviews in a week if you've got 20 or 30 hours. So yeah, this kind of scales to your available time, but absolutely don't think that you can't do this if you're going to try and fit it in around other things, because you can, and you'll still benefit.
Absolutely. Well, we're sure you have questions. Cassie, do you want to introduce how we'll do that?
Sure. I just threw it back in the chat. So Lisa,
yeah.
if you want to share your screen, and I'll walk folks through this easy retro board. Essentially, you can hit that plus sign if you're already in there and add a question easily that way, or you can throw it in the chat and I can add it for you if you're having trouble. And we'll run through questions that way. But also, we're always interested in hearing new voices. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question that way. I think I'll put like maybe a minute on the clock to give folks a chance to add questions, and then we'll go into it. I'll be happy to read them out to Lisa and Philip to answer. But if you want to expand on the question or introduce yourself, feel free to interrupt me, and we can run it that way. So I'm going to put a countdown on the clock, about a minute to add some questions there. Philip, right on cue.
These are great questions. Keep them coming.
And all questions are valid, so feel free to ask any old thing that's crossing your mind.
Yeah. Maybe one thing I'll just touch on while we're waiting for the countdown timer to wind down, because it was coming up for me a lot this week, is I do a lot of other work coaching newsrooms. I do a lot of help for newsrooms that have been active for many years. And it's interesting in that context, I'm definitely seeing a pattern of newsrooms that are 5+ years in and have still missed some really obvious basic things, like understanding the importance of having a basic budget and financial targets in place. And those are the kind of things that we aim to equip you with right away, so that if 5 years from now we speak, I'm going to feel like you're in great financial and operational health, as opposed to, yeah, maybe struggling with some pretty basic things that we could have equipped you with very quickly in the early days. And those are the kind of things that really make it difficult for newsrooms to succeed. And they're pretty easy hurdles to get over. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, folks can continue to add questions throughout the session. I think we'll have plenty of time to get to those. Thank you, Maya, for your question, or Myra, excuse me. I added it to the board. So if it sounds good to you, Philip, Lisa, I'll start reading those off and you guys can take turns.
Right
cool.
on.
So our first question is, we're not launched, but we have a launch date of September 16th. I see that the bootcamp coincides with that. Is it possible to work through the bootcamp while launching, or do I need to delay the launch?
That's a great question. I mean, we had probably half the participants last year. We actually split the participants into 2 cohorts, those that were already launched and those who had not yet launched. So it's absolutely possible to be in the bootcamp kind of in a post-launch state. What I will say is that those who joined in a pre-launch state take advantage of more of the lessons than those who have launched and made some decisions before they've launched. So, I mean, I wouldn't really want to influence your decision one way or the other, just to say, yeah, absolutely, it would work and we'll support your launch. And if you feel it might be better to delay 8 weeks, that would also not be, a negative. So yeah, I guess take that and make make the best decision you can. I mean, I think the long and the short is that there are things learned in the bootcamp that will help a launch be successful. And so I guess it just depends on how confident you are that you've got the best support you need around that launch.
Great. And if folks have follow-ups based on, answers, feel free to jump in. We'll keep it moving for now. So the next question is, what has the success rate been for participants, i.e. securing funding to at least get off the ground, if not be profitable?
Yeah, so of the 24 projects that were in last year's bootcamp, which they graduated basically in November, December 2020, so they're just 6 months roughly in now, still 90% of them are active. And we believe that roughly 45% of them are not only active, but growing, meaning that they're bringing in some revenue and there's, real signs of audience growth. So in terms of, let me actually open up the board so I can see the question. Sorry, now I'm kind of guessing at what the question was. 1 second. Can you read the question again for me?
Yep.
Oh, okay,
yeah. So what's been the success rate for participants in terms of securing funding and getting off the ground after the bootcamp?
Yeah, well, I mean, an interesting scenario happened last year, which is that unexpectedly, so Google News Initiative, the team attended the final presentations. And after hearing the final presentations, they were so blown away that they said, actually, we're going to find some money and give out some grants to these participants. That was by no means a expected thing. And so the success rate basically was extremely high. I'd say 90%, because Google stepped in and gave everybody a small grant to begin with. We can't promise that this year, but that was one aspect. And then since then, as I was saying, roughly 45% are bringing in revenue either from sponsorship or advertising, or directly from readers in terms of via memberships or donations or subscriptions or what have you. So yeah, it's in that range.
Cool. And can we talk more about the homework assignments?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I should probably grab that just because it's probably not a Lisa question, but don't let me take all the questions this time.
No worries, Philip. You've got the expertise, so I'm happy to have to take this one.
Yeah, you know, the assignments typically fall into 2 buckets or 3 buckets. So, you know, one theme in the assignments is that you're further developing details around your business model, or we don't really call it a business plan because those are often documents created that nobody reads, but we help you create a business model that is kind of a very lightweight version of a business plan. So every week you're iterating that forward and adding more information to it. Including, you know, estimates of what revenue you believe will come in, and who you believe the early adopters will be, and kind of refining that as you go each week. Number 2 is you'll be typically doing some form of interview each week, either with you know, a customer, potential customer. Customer in this case could be a podcast listener, a SMS recipient, a reader, you know, a viewer, a listener, what have you. But typically each week you're going to be engaged in either preparing to do interviews, i.e. writing your script for that, or doing some interviews if you're at that stage. And the third piece, which is slightly more optional, is kind of case study reading. So we try and provide a lot of really relevant case studies. So not case studies of like the Texas Tribune, which launched with $12 or $20 million and so on. We try and provide you kind of really relevant case studies of people similar to you who've launched small, local, or thematic news initiatives or information products, so that you can really hear from them about how they got from 0 up to 100, up to 1,000 or more subscribers or customers or what have you. And you know, those readings are obviously optional, but we do feel that we reference them in the weekly seminar, and we do feel that they add a lot of value, and we try and keep them pretty light and very specific to that week's theme.
Great. Next question is, how close to launching should someone need to be to participate? What level of funding would I need to have at this point?
Zero funding needed. Yeah, we don't expect anybody to be coming in with funding. You know, that classic examples of, oh, sorry, Lisa, do you want to take that one?
Well, I can take some of the next few.
I'm hoarding.
Those are more wheelhouse for me.
Sorry, I'm
Don't
bad
worry
at this,
about
especially if I'm under caffeinated. I just jump on all the questions. Yeah, so you know, roughly, I would say most of the participants coming in last year did not have any meaningful form of funding, and it's certainly not expected that you would. You know, a typical example would be you might be working in a newsroom currently, and you might be seeing, maybe you moved back home to your, you know, to a smaller non-metro city or town during the pandemic, and you're realizing, whoa, my town doesn't have a local news source, and I'm here right now, and maybe this is the right time to move laterally into a startup where I'm providing news right here close to people I know and for a community that needs it. That's kind of one big chunk of participants. And so often that person, you know, may have a current job but doesn't really have funding per se. Another scenario is often somebody who's already left. Maybe they've gone back to university or school, or have moved because of the pandemic and thus gotten, you know, downsized or laid off, and are in a position where they want to launch. And again, funding is probably not present in that scenario. So that's very common. We maybe had two participants, I believe, who came into the program either with some kind of a fellowship. Often would be the initial runway they'd have. So maybe they've got, you know, a year's salary paid by a university or some other situation like that. But nobody came into the program with, you know, $100,000 preparing for a launch. If you're in that situation, I would say the bootcamp is probably not the right fit. You know, if you've got funding of, you know, 6 figures plus, there's probably other programs that Lion has that would be a far better fit for what you're doing to help you get ready. And yeah, that's, I mean, still apply if you've got that kind of money, but there may be better supports for you than the bootcamp. I hope that's okay to say, Lisa. You should definitely be a Lion member.
If you've got 6 figures of funding, you're in pretty good shape.
Well, you might be, might not be. I mean, there's definitely been, you know, startups that have faltered with far more funding. So, you know, certainly the bootcamp would still put you in great shape. But yeah, you've got fewer concerns that are relevant to the bootcamp in terms of like how to get up and running without money, which is really what we talk about.
Well, I can take these next couple. Do we still have access to the experts and expertise post fellowship? Yes, you do. So there are three kind of ways that you are supported after the boot camp is over. The first is you do get additional coaching for, how long is it, Philip? The next year?
Yep, full year.
Okay.
Yep.
So you're not just cut off and sort of left to the wolves. You'll be able to check in with Philip and the other coaches. You're also, you are able to access a free membership to Lion after the boot camp. And if you're not a Lion member, it's just really an incredible community of folks who are doing the exact same thing you're doing, who are having the same challenges and maybe have had some success, and everybody's really willing to share. So the community is really wonderful. And then also we have many other sort of programs and learning and training and, funding opportunities through Lion that you'll have access to. So yeah, those are some really great things. And then you'll also have access to the bootcamp community itself. We found last year that folks got really tight. I mean, this is an emotional moment, right? You're trying to launch something.
Are you looking for the word roller coaster?
Yes, but nothing bonds quite like a roller coaster, right? So folks got really tight, even though nobody had ever met in person, and really have been a wonderful source of support. I mean, even still, like the bootcamp Slack is still a really great place. So yeah, you're definitely not cut off. Does it need to be a website, or can it be a newsletter or podcast? Absolutely. We are platform agnostic. So whatever you're going to launch, there's a space for you in the boot camp. How many applicants are you expecting? So we're thinking, we're aiming for another cohort of 24 organizations. And there are up to 2 people who can participate per organization. So last year we had, like about 30 people across 24 news organizations. Honestly, most people are launching by themselves, but if you've got a partner and you want to do this together, you're very welcome to. Oh, how many applicants? Oh, I mean, not gonna lie, it's pretty competitive process. But I think a lot of folks who were part of our cohort last year maybe didn't expect that, their idea, which was really, really cool, would get chosen. So you should absolutely apply. And yeah, we'd love to look at your application.
Great. And so the next question is, what are some of the other basics that will be covered in the camp? Is there anything else, Philip or Lisa, that we should mention? Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I always like to jump in here with the story. I think I shared it last time. So I do a lot of writing about what I believe are the crossovers in skills between journalists and entrepreneurs. I believe there's actually a lot of crossover in terms of skills that a journalist or somebody who's interested in the field of media brings to the field of entrepreneurship. And in writing about that, I've certainly had friends and colleagues write to me and say, okay, well, you kind of got it right, but there's some challenges here too. And so I had a friend write recently who said, I don't know that these skills translate perfectly to the day-to-day practices of running a for-profit or nonprofit journalism business. And some of the things they highlighted were, and these are all things that we cover in the bootcamp, thanks to this input, how to assess market demand. So how do you know that there's actually enough hunger in your market to support a news or information product? How to figure out pricing, whether it's subscription or membership or donations. How do you, where do you set that number? How do you get it right? Most journalism startup founders believe they got it wrong out of the gate. So we talk about that quite a bit. How do you make a sales call to a sponsor, advertiser, or potential philanthropic funder? We do talk about that quite a bit because it's a hurdle for journalists. Calling sources for interviews seems to be, second nature, as it should be, but picking up the phone to call a sponsor or advertiser, there's often a bit of friction there. So we do, that's the one area where we do role play. How do you create a compelling marketing pitch about your new effort? So how do you tell that story? And I think most importantly, one thing that we really dive deep on is how to sell yourself as the face of this new organization or product or company. because often that confidence is something that's not there if a journalist has been kind of hidden in the back corner of the newsroom, and that hasn't necessarily been kind of the face on CNN or whatever. So in addition to those core skills, we also help you do some very practical planning. So setting clear financial goals, as I mentioned, and documenting a realistic plan to get there. We really push this idea of talking to customers, or readers, listeners, watchers, what have you. So being in a ongoing conversation with the people that you're hoping to be reporting with or for, so that you really understand their needs, their information needs. And we focus a lot on how to run experiments. That's another huge part of the curriculum. So how to quickly and rigorously test your ideas so that you pull out the assumptions and ideally eliminate as many assumptions as possible before you launch. So yeah, those are kind of the key parts of the curriculum at that level. Hopefully that's helpful.
Cool. And that takes us into our next question, where someone's asking about what we'll learn about funding, around grants, and learn how to get started with raising funds. Do you have anything to add on that, Philip or Lisa?
Or I'll just pause and see if Lisa wants to jump in, probably because I know the curriculum. That's an easier one for me.
Go for it.
Yeah. So I mean, one of the things that we don't do a lot on how to raise, let's say, investment capital or how to raise philanthropic capital, because what we found is that is a challenge that entrepreneurs face way further down the road. Is going to be very unlikely that in 8 weeks, your product or project or operation is going to be at the point to be attracting big amounts of capital. And so what we try and do in the bootcamp is eliminate all of the concerns and worries that an entrepreneur would have that are going to come up 12 or 16 or 18 months out. We kind of say, okay, let's deal with those when the time comes in the add-on coaching, in the Lion community and Slack. And we just try and keep you focused on what is absolutely critical to get right kind of pre-launch and in the first 6 months. And more often than not, that doesn't involve raising capital. It's typically going to be bootstrapped. It's going to be done either off the side of the desk or with some financial support that you've currently got access to through your current job or through your family or what have you. And so we don't really dive deep on that, although we do touch on all business models and tax statuses. So we do touch on the challenges of nonprofit startups, as well as for-profit and other forms, S corps, and so on. Hopefully that answers that question.
Cool. And this next question is, what makes an application stand out?
I can add a little to that. One thing I think it's important to note that Philip has touched on is you don't have to be a super experienced journalist to be successful in the boot camp. The thing that is most valuable is that you've got a good idea and you know your community and you know what they need because you've talked to them, right? And because you're invested and if you haven't talked to them already, you will in the boot camp. And so folks, who are really looking to meet an information need and they're pretty clear on what that is, those applications definitely stand out. And folks who know their community and are really passionate about what they're doing and are really going to kind of like bring their best selves to this and put themselves out there and are enthusiastic about it, and are also realistic about it, right? But again, we help all of that in the boot camp. So it's mainly that sort of community knowledge, that passion, and that desire to meet that information need. Great. And I'll just quickly plug an event we're having on this Monday, July 26th. It's going to be a really cool chat between one of the co-founders of the 19th News and the executive director of Outlier, talking about the opportunities independent news startups have to kind of reshape the space and the ecosystem. But if you're looking for support on filling out your application as part of that event, after the kind of fireside chat, you'll have a chance to talk to other folks on the team and meet with other folks who are interested in applying to get support on filling out your application. So I'll throw a link to the chat so you can register for that all. Cool.
And then a couple more questions. This next one is, I'm trying to work with marginalized populations who are not going to be a source of revenue. Will this bootcamp help us come up with creative ways to cover the costs to intentionally serve that population without having to sell out to wealthier audiences? What a
Heck
thoughtful
yeah.
question. We were just talking about this yesterday, Lisa.
I know. Well, yeah, I think there's I think Lion is actually doing a whole webinar on this today or tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken.
Today.
Is it today? Yeah. So I mean, if you become a Lion member, as you would if you got into the boot camp, you get a Lion aspiring entrepreneur membership for a year. You would have access to that recording. But absolutely, I mean, I'm going to attend that session, but it's something that we think about a lot. And there's no, unfortunately, super clear answers, but there are some really interesting models out there. The one that's come up the most recently, just to give you kind of a sense that there are some models that often aren't thought of, or you may not have thought of yet, is at least two organizations I know that are delivering information in Spanish or specifically to a marginalized community, doing so typically via text message, because they find that's kind of a more effective means of getting the word out there. I have found that because they've been very efficient at being in those communities, being of service to those communities, and of earning the trust of those communities so that they are able to send them messages. They've been able to get contracts from local government. So not needing to go to a wealthy community, but going to government agencies and other kind of nonprofit agencies that need to get information out to those communities. And those agencies contract with that publisher to help them get messages out about COVID and vaccination, and messages, health messaging, economic messaging, and so forth. So there are other models. I'm always on the lookout for those, because that is definitely a challenge that has been left unaddressed with the downsizing of news that we hope people in the boot camp will try and solve 100%.
Well, and that's one of the things that's so exciting about something like the boot camp and a new organization is, we are finding that tons and tons of people are starting these organizations directly to speak to marginalized or underserved or underrepresented communities who have been overlooked by mainstream news. And it's just such a wonderful bright spot in the journalism ecosystem. And that's what this conversation with Amanda Zamora from the 19th is about, right? She saw a real need for women and women of color to get really great information that's tailored to them. And we've had a lot of people in the boot camp, especially last year, who were doing just that. And yes, this is a challenge in the industry, the sort of the reader revenue aspect of it. And we are addressing that. Unfortunately, today's webinar is for a different Lion program. So just as in the boot camp, you get some things that are just for you. This is just for another program. But one other exciting thing about the boot camp that we found is folks who graduated last year are then further down the road in their journey, and then they become a good fit for other programs that Lion offers. So you can kind of, there can be a progression there. So yeah.
Totally. But yeah, it's definitely not an easy challenge to solve. So we're keen to have people that are passionate and have commitment to try and solve it. And we'll give you 110% of our effort to try and help you do that.
Great. And we have two really perfect questions to end on. So this first one is, have you had any participants either decide not to launch or do major changes to their plan as a result of the bootcamp?
Yeah, a lot of major changes. Yes. I mean, that's one, just going back to the kind of criteria for a really strong application. One thing that we're looking for is that a founder or a potential founder is open to iterating and shifting and evolving their plan. The pattern, just to dive into that for 1 second, the pattern that I saw when I interviewed all those founders during my fellowship was that a lot of people launch without a good plan, and they just start doing the reporting or information delivery. And a year later, they realize, oof, I don't have a business plan and I don't have a way to pay myself. But you've invested a year of your life's energy and time and commitment, and you're really emotionally attached to the idea at that point and not open to changing it much, even though it may be totally obvious from the outside, it will not work as a business. It'll never get you to your goals. And so what we do look for is people who seem to be open to the idea, seem to be willing to use their own skepticism, power of skepticism on their own idea, and who can look at their own plan objectively and realize where it needs some further investigation or where it needs some further refinement. That's definitely one thing we encourage to do. So we want to see people adjust their plans. And going back to the question about having launched already, what we did see is that people who had launched already were definitely less able to just technically adjust their plans, and less, a little less comfortable with changing, because they've launched and they're like, well, I'm doing the thing, so I don't want to change it too much. However, interestingly, some of those that had launched and didn't make changes have paused. One project did decide not to launch, more as I think a factor of just other things in their life than anything in the bootcamp itself. Maybe the final way to end this question is that, it's 8 weeks. This has been a really zany year for most of the world. And so life happens. And so we definitely don't expect that 100% of graduates are going to, they all launch. We really expect you to launch during that time, whether you continue after, our expectation is not that 100% will continue. That would be very unrealistic. But we do give those that want to continue the support they need to do so. And we see that most people do.
Great. And so this last question is a tough one, but I think it's a great one to end on. Do you have anything to add on to you? What is the recipe for a successful launch?
All right. Well, I guess Lisa's on mute, so I'll jump on that. Yeah, it's a great question to end on. For me, it is the founder has addressed as much risk in their idea as possible prior to the launch. And so when they launch, they are receiving significant signals that they are on the right track from the people that they expect to be engaged or engaging with their effort. So you've been talking to early subscribers to your newsletter when it's in the tens or dozens of subscribers to ensure that they're getting what they need. You've been talking to potential sponsors or advertisers or whatever your revenue source is going to be about their interest in reaching your audience or your market. You've found language that describes the problem that your product is solving for people from those people directly. You haven't made it up out of thin air. You've been talking to people and they're like, wow, when I read your newsletter, I really am, my eyes are open to how our city government is run in a way that I never have been before. And so that kind of language is baked into your launch. So it's really that you have taken as much risk out of the idea as possible before you've launched, and that you've launched with what I like to call a cupcake. So instead of baking a whole wedding cake, you bake the smallest possible version of that cake and you launch it so that you can start getting feedback from the community, from sponsors, from advertisers, from readers, from listeners soon and fast. As is said in the in the startup world, they say launch early and launch often. And the idea is that if you've launched, you'll know if you've launched too late. I'm going to mess this up, but basically the idea is that it's always the right time to launch. And if you wait too long, you're just missing out on an opportunity for learning. So we just want you to make sure that you're out the door with a product that really addresses a need that people have, and that you are in conversation with those people regularly so you can evolve it from that point.
Perfect. Well,
yeah.
go
I'll
ahead,
just
Lisa.
add really quick. Yeah, my idea there is essentially what Philip said, but you've got a focused, tested idea that there's a clear need for. You've got a solid plan for where you want to go and how you're going to get there. And you're also super open to pivoting as you get more information.
Said far more concisely than I ever could. Thank you, Lisa.
We're going to stitch that on.
Oh, yes. And so the phrase is, if you're not embarrassed when you launch, you've waited too long.
Well, on that note, are there any other lingering questions or comments before we let you go? Great. Well, thanks to everybody for joining and for your super thoughtful questions. We really, really appreciate your interest and your passion And we hope to see your application soon. And like we mentioned, that event on Monday, it's going to be really fun. You'll have a chance to ask questions live, not just during the event, but on the application. If you're like me and need like structure to sit down and fill out an application, we'll be able to provide that. So please stay in touch, and I'll send out an email later today with this recording and some links.
Great.
Cool.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Really appreciate it. Have a great day. Hope to see your applications.
Take care. Bye-bye.